Things are probably going to get a lot worse before they get better. Ever since the CDC officially declared a pandemic on March 11th, one by one, cities and states are locking down and ordering people to stay at home. As a result, companies in the airline, restaurant, travel, and retail sector are taking big hits, which in and of itself wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for these four things. First, corporate debt. Corporate debt is at the highest levels that they've ever been at in history. Also, falling oil prices, which isn't so great for the US because it's one of the largest producers of oil in the world. Also, the domino effect that mass layoffs will have on consumer spending, which we haven't even begun to see yet. And fourthly, dysfunctional politics, where we have two opposing parties in gridlock, the Democrats and the Republicans, and they seem to have trouble agreeing on anything, even in times of crisis. So there's a lot going on in the world right now, and it's more important than ever to have financial literacy. In the midst of panic and fear, financial literacy is what empowers you to make decisions on the basis of facts and not emotion. So today, I'm here to help you make sense of what's happening and why it's happening, and then use that information to make informed decisions for yourself. In this video, we're going to talk about why we're headed into a recession. Also, we'll talk about what factors will influence how bad this recession gets and how quickly we might get out of it. And finally, I'll also talk about how to prepare yourself financially so that you can get to the other side intact and even benefit from all this craziness. Because as Albert Einstein once said, in the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity. Essentially, this video is going to be a bit of economics 101, plus practical tips on how to handle your money wisely during recessions. Okay, we have a lot to cover, so let's dive right in. At the beginning of 2020, which was not that long ago, things were as good as they could possibly get. Unemployment was at record lows, and the stock market was making record new highs. And now, after a decade of low interest rates, cheap debt, and a huge run-up in asset prices, you could say a bubble was forming. And it looks like the bubble has finally popped and the recession is finally here. Boy, do things turn around quickly. According to the National Bureau of Economic Research, a recession is officially defined as a significant decline in economic activity spread across the economy lasting more than a few months, normally visible in real GDP, real income, employment, industrial production, and wholesale retail sales. So if declines in GDP and employment are markers of a recession, then we're already seeing a lot of that already. Personal consumption accounts for 70% of GDP. Personal consumption is anything that you consume. Food, beverages, services, anything that's non-business. Now, out of that 70%, 45% of that is services, which means eating out, travel, all those services that you pay for. With everyone on lockdown, there goes a big chunk of our GDP. Banks and economists are releasing all kinds of forecasts for GDP in the second quarter, and they range from anywhere from 10% drop, according to UBS, all the way to a 24% drop in the second quarter, according to Goldman Sachs. And then there's unemployment. With everyone on lockdown, the travel and hospitality industry has obviously been hit the hardest, and the Department of Labor reported that weekly unemployment insurance claims climbed to 281,000. Which is a 25% spike from the previous week. And these numbers are only as of March 14th because there's a lag to the data. Weekly unemployment claims numbers get published every Thursday, and I'm sure the next reading is going to be much higher. Before all this started, unemployment was actually at record lows at 3.5%. Now, the official unemployment number gets published on the first Friday of every month. So again, there's a lag because the next one's not till April 3rd, I believe. But it's definitely going to be a lot higher than 3.5%. Because the reality is the domino effect is just beginning. All the people who were laid off from companies in the travel, hospitality, and oil industries, they're all going to have to reduce their spending, possibly default on their loans, stop paying rent, etc., etc., etc. Eventually, companies that aren't even directly affected by the pandemic will eventually feel the effects, because nobody exists in a vacuum. Fed official James Bullard predicted that unemployment could get as high as 30% in the second quarter of 2020. 30% unemployment, that is higher than even during the Great Depression, when unemployment was at 24.9%. A lot of people seem to think all this is going to be over really soon, but I think it's going to drag on a lot longer than we would like it to. And there's a couple reasons why. First, we have ultra low interest rates. Extreme declines in economic activity, like the one we're experiencing now, can be solved with a quick fix like lowering interest rates. Lowering interest rates makes it cheap to borrow money and helps revive a slow economy. But that's during normal times. Because now in 2020, we've already had a whole decade of ultra low interest rates. So cutting them more isn't going to have much of an effect. When you cut rates from 8% to 3%, that makes an impact. But when rates have already remained close to zero for an entire decade, and then the Fed cuts rates from almost zero to actually zero, not that helpful. That's why when the Fed announced its second emergency rate cut in response to the pandemic on March 15th, the stock market actually went down. Usually rate cuts have the opposite effect. Stock markets go up because lower rates are good for the economy during normal times. The next reason why this recession is going to be difficult is that we have record high debt to income ratios. As of today, governments, individuals, and companies, especially companies, all over the world are carrying more debt than ever before. Now, carrying more debt isn't bad in and of itself, as long as your income also goes up with that debt. It's kind of like racking up a ton of credit card debt because you're eating lobster every night and you're just living large. And even though your debt gets bigger and bigger and your monthly payments on that debt get bigger and bigger, as long as your salary keeps going up too, you don't really notice. Because theoretically, you could go on like that forever. But as soon as your income takes a hit, the party's over. And that is exactly what's happening now. Debt to income ratios are even higher than they were after the 2008-2009 financial crisis. According to the IMF, global corporate debt, which is not including financial firms like banks, has risen from 84% of GDP to 92% of GDP. And in America, the ratio of corporate debt to GDP has gone up from 43% to 47% of GDP, according to the Fed. So now that the world is going on lockdown to deal with this pandemic, companies that were counting on a certain amount of income to pay their debt now no longer have that income, and they'll probably not be able to make their payments. Especially oil companies are having a hard time because they're dealing with the double whammy of the pandemic and low oil prices. 10 years of ultra low interest rates encouraged a lot of companies to borrow money, sometimes quite irresponsibly. And now that the party is over, there's going to be consequences that will be felt throughout the entire economy. Companies are now starting to realize that they need to start paying down this debt because it's become unsustainable given that they have less income to pay that debt. And so now they're left with one of two options. Option one is they drastically reduce spending in order to come up with more cash to pay off their debts, and that will result in mass layoffs. Obviously not good for the economy either. Option two, companies can default on their debt, which is basically saying, hey, we're not gonna pay this back because we just can't, sorry. So defaulting is really the last resort, but when companies start defaulting, their lenders will suffer big losses. When you owe somebody money, that loan is a liability to you, the borrower, but to the lender, it's an asset. On their balance sheet, it shows up as an asset, and they're counting on that asset being there. Then when the borrower defaults, all of a sudden, what you thought was an asset disappears overnight. Imagine this going on a mass scale with all the companies that are suffering right now from high debts and lowered incomes as a result of this crisis. This is going to have ripple effects as companies go under and lenders go under, and the amount of money and credit circulating in the economy shrinks. So debt is a huge problem, and deleveraging is never a pleasant process. However, the US government does have a lot of power to make this as painless as possible. And really, the biggest risks are not actually from the debts themselves, but from the failure of policymakers to do the right things. Which brings me to the third reason why I think this recession will drag on a little longer than we would like: the lack of strong leadership in our political system. Right now, Democrats and Republicans, they're taking a really long time to agree on how they're going to help the millions of Americans that are losing their jobs. And right now, we have a president who isn't really providing good guidance and reassurance to the public. So recessions and pandemics happen, but effective leadership and good fiscal stimulus measures that the government delivers quickly and efficiently will really ease the suffering a lot for all of us. So I really hope that Democrats and Republicans that will be able to work together and navigate us through this economic crisis and health crisis. Also, compared to some Asian countries, the US response to the pandemic sadly has been really inadequate. So far, the US has only managed to test about 60,000 people. And compare this to South Korea, where they've administered over 290,000 tests. And South Korea is much smaller. The US population is 6 times bigger than that of Korea. So right now, we are woefully under testing, and any estimates of how many cases there are in the US are way, way too low. Of course, it's not any one person's fault. There's a multitude of reasons to blame. But it is kind of undeniable that the current administration totally underestimated the seriousness of the disease and didn't take action fast enough to contain it. And that is all going to make social distancing drag on a lot longer than it needs to, and therefore will slow down the economy a lot more than it needs to. Now let's talk about what factors will influence how bad this recession gets, as well as how fast we'll get out of it. As of today, the S&P 500 is down about 30% from the all-time highs. In 2008, the stock market fell as much as 52%. And during the Great Depression, it was down almost 90% from the highs. So right now, at 30% down from the highs, I really don't think we've seen the full extent of it yet. Of course, we all know no matter how bad things get, recovery always follows. So it is a question of when, not if, we'll get out of this mess. And a big determinant of how long the recovery takes is how the government responds. During the Great Depression, the government took action, but they did it too little too late. And that's why a recession became a depression. And it's probably the worst economic crisis that we've ever seen in American history. During the financial crisis in 2008 and 9, however, the government took action really quickly and they took big, bold measures. A lot of monetary stimulus and fiscal stimulus. When faced with economic crises, governments can take action in 2 forms: monetary stimulus and fiscal stimulus. Monetary stimulus includes things like cutting interest rates, purchasing assets, and printing money. Fiscal stimulus means things like tax cuts, social programs, bailouts of too big to fail companies, and helicopter money, which means writing checks directly to individuals to help them out. For this crisis that we're experiencing now, the government has done tons of monetary stimulus already. I really give kudos to them for responding so quickly, so fast. The Fed has cut interest rates to 0, and they've announced that they'll pretty much buy bonds in unlimited amounts and print unlimited amounts of money. That's definitely going to help to stabilize things. Just like I was saying earlier, because debt to income ratios are so high, because companies are really over leveraged right now and burdened by a lot of debt. And now, once they start defaulting and cutting down expenses and the amount of credit in the economy starts to contract, we're going to have a lot less money circulating in the economy. The less money there is circulating in the economy, whether it's in the form of credit/debt or actual cash, that's not good for the economy. So the Fed right now is stepping in by buying bonds, printing money, and basically replacing that loss of money and credit circulating in the economy. So again, the Fed and their monetary stimulus measures are definitely going to help. However, on the fiscal side, things aren't so great. We're still waiting on Congress, at least as of today, March 24th, to agree on a plan to help Americans out. So rumors have it that the fiscal stimulus bill is going to be anywhere from $1 to $2 trillion. I'm sure they're going to agree on something, but I hope that once it comes out, it's going to be effective and generous and really help to make this economic crisis as painless and short-lived as possible. Another X factor that will determine how bad this recession gets and how long it lasts is obviously how soon we get a vaccine and a cure. Because once we get a vaccine and a cure, we're not going to have to do any of this social distancing. It'll just be another disease or flu that we just deal with. At that point, life would pretty much go back to normal, but vaccines and cures don't happen overnight. And a lot of experts are saying it's going to take anywhere from 12 to 18 months. Until then, lockdowns, quarantine life, and social distancing are probably going to be something we have to all get used to. So now let's talk about how you can prepare yourself financially. The goal here is to get to the other side intact, because inevitably there will be a recovery, and you want to get to the other side not only intact but also possibly benefit from this crisis. Stock market crashes like this don't come around that often. And if you're prepared, this could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make lots and lots of money. So your number one focus right now should be to preserve cash. You need to make sure you have enough cash to live on, even if your income goes down, or God forbid, you lose your job. And the best way to do that is to make sure you have an emergency fund. An emergency fund is a savings account with cash set aside in it that would cover at least 3 months of living expenses. The general rule of thumb is you probably want anywhere from 3 to 6 months of living expenses just set aside in your emergency fund. So if you don't have one yet, look at your expenses, see where you can cut, and start building your emergency fund. Sell old stuff, cancel some subscriptions, don't eat out anymore. Okay, never mind, actually nobody's eating out anymore. And just save your money. And if you're investing in a 401k or other investment account, stop contributing to it until you've built up your emergency fund. Because what good is it to add money to your investments when you don't have any sort of cash cushion so that you have to sell your investments later on if something bad happens? And that often ends with you having to sell your investments at the worst possible time. Any money you're contributing into investment accounts should be money that you are okay with and are absolutely sure that you won't have to touch for at least 10 years. So once you've built up your emergency fund, then and only then should you start thinking about investing. Also, as a side note, if you have been laid off, there are a couple things you can do. First of all, you can file a claim for unemployment insurance. If you've been laid off, you're probably entitled to at least 6 months of unemployment benefits. Also, if you have student loans, credit cards, and other debts to pay, call your lenders and let them know what's going on. A head in the sand approach here is not the way to go, because most lenders offer some sort of relief, especially with everything that's going on right now, and they'll more than likely be willing to work with you. You can ask them for reduced monthly payments, interest only, have a grace period. There's a lot of options. Okay, but back to investing. Now, I know a lot of you have been wanting to get into the market, but maybe we're a little nervous to do it, so you never really pulled the trigger. But I'm telling you, around now and in the next few months is going to be the best time to get in. Even though I have no idea where the bottom is and the market could go down a lot more from here, the fact of the matter is, times like these often present the best opportunities to buy stocks cheaply. So I would either start buying gradually in small amounts, or at the very least, be prepared to buy in the near future by having your money ready in a brokerage account. It takes a few days to open a brokerage account and then transfer your funds over, so you want to have all of that in place before the market starts to turn around. The best type of brokerage account for beginners to start with is a Roth IRA, which allows you to not pay any taxes on the investments you hold inside the Roth IRA. You could also open a taxable brokerage account, except it doesn't come with any tax benefits and you're gonna owe full taxes on any gains you make on the investments within that account. So it makes way more sense to start with any tax-free accounts before you start investing in taxable accounts. And the Roth IRA is the place to start. There's a lot of great $0 commission brokerages that offer Roth IRAs. Personally, I use Fidelity, but Vanguard and Schwab are also great options. Once you have your Roth IRA open, funded, and ready to go, then there's 3 ways to invest it to take advantage of this market crash. The first way to do it is to buy individual stocks. There are tons of companies whose stocks have become 30, 40, 50, even 60% cheaper because of everything that's going on right now. So if you're willing to do the work to research companies and analyze their investment potential, there's gonna be a lot of amazing opportunities to buy some great companies on sale. Now, the second way to invest during a recession is you can buy index funds. Because researching individual stocks can be a lot of work, it can be very lucrative, but not everyone is willing or knowledgeable enough to be able to do that. That's why the vast majority of people are better off buying index funds. Index funds are a way for you to buy the entire stock market, all with one easy purchase. For example, instead of trying to pick which of the companies in the S&P 500 is going to survive and thrive after this crisis, you can just buy an S&P 500 index fund, because that's going to contain all the companies in the S&P 500. Even though there will probably be a few companies in the mix that don't make it, on average, the S&P 500 as a whole will recover and go back up. The third and easiest way to invest and benefit from this market crash is to buy a target date fund. Target date funds are mutual funds that usually have several different index funds in it, with a mix of stock index funds and bond index funds. Basically, they are a fund of funds, and as such, they're even more diversified than owning just one index fund. Also, target date funds target specific ages, hence the name target date funds, because someone who is 5 years away from retirement should be investing very differently from someone who is 30 years away from retirement. And so target date funds take all of that into consideration for you so that you don't have to decide these things for yourself. All you have to do is buy one fund. Now, all three of these methods, investing in individual stocks, investing in index funds, or investing in target date funds, are all ways that you can benefit from this recession by getting into the market when it's low. To help you understand each of these ways of investing better, I've created a Roth IRA investing starter kit. It's important to understand what you're buying and why, and this free download explains all the ins and outs of stocks, index funds, and target date funds. I've put the link below. Grab the PDF if you're interested. It's a free download. Now that we're all cooped up at home doing social distancing, I would say it's a perfect time to study up on investing and start taking control of your financial future. So get the free download, the link is below. What if you already have investments? In that case, please, please, please don't panic sell. That's the last thing you want to do. It's a classic beginner investing mistake to buy when things are going up and to sell when things are going down. Look, I know it's not easy to stay calm when the market's going crazy, and watching my investments go down while the stock market tanks isn't fun for me either. But a paper loss isn't the same thing as a permanent loss. So you have to understand the difference. Right now, if your investments are in the red and you still own those investments, that's a paper loss. In due time, those losses will eventually reverse. That is, unless you've invested in one company and that company goes bankrupt. But if you're diversified into index funds or the companies that you've invested in are financially sound, then history has shown that paper losses eventually turn back into gains. However, if you sell now, after the market has already taken a huge nosedive, then you've turned a paper loss into a permanent loss. And you're not going to be in the market anymore when it recovers, which means you don't get a chance to make back any of your losses because you've already locked in your losses when you sold. So do not panic sell. It's never a good idea, no matter how bad it gets. As for me, other than doing a lot more stock research than usual, I'm really not doing much different from my usual investing strategies. With my index fund portfolio, I'm still dollar cost averaging on the first of every month, rebalancing it once a year, and I am not selling, adjusting, or tinkering with it at all. And with my stock portfolio, I've stepped up my researching efforts and I am on the hunt for some good deals. Bottom line, no matter how bad it gets, the economy and therefore the stock market will survive. Eventually, people will want to fly, stay in hotels, and go to coffee shops and restaurants again. Keep that in mind always. My final words of advice: wash your hands, preserve your cash, and then don't waste a crisis. I think that sums it up pretty nicely. What do you think? And speaking of not wasting a crisis, while we're all stuck at home doing social distancing, it's a great time to start a little side hustle from home and start making some extra money. I have some cool ideas for you, so make sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell because next week's video is going to be all about some ways to make extra money while stuck at home. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you and your loved ones stay safe and healthy. Personally, I find myself having to be very intentional with my thoughts. Otherwise, I'll end up stressing and future tripping about all kinds of worst case scenarios, most of which aren't going to happen. So let's remember to stay positive. This is a reminder to myself as well. And I'll see you next week, same time, same place. See you soon.